So we're going to start our set of modules on development by talking about prenatal issues and talking about the difference between stage theories and theories that emphasize continuity during development. We're going to be covering mostly stage theories because that's what Piaget and Erikson focus on. So once again, we'll be talking about continuity versus stages, and then stability versus change. Are you the same person you were as an infant? Some theories of development say that you're pretty much the same as you are from 1 year of age into adulthood, whereas others will talk about the possibility of change to a greater degree. And then prenatal development. How do we go from conception to the healthy fetus and the risk of teratogens? And then finally, some newborn skills and behaviors. So the three primary issues in developmental psychology are nature versus nurture. How much is in our environment that affects our development? How much is biology? And prenatal environment. Change and stability. In what ways do we change as we age versus which ways do we stay the same? And finally, continuity versus stages. Is development a gradual change, continuity, or are there leaps to new ways of thinking and behaving? And that's stage theory. So continuity versus stages. People that take more of a nurture perspective see development as a function of experience, and that this experience changes the development very gradually and very continuously. Whereas people that focus more, or researchers that focus more on nature, favor more of a stage theory, where biological maturation causes a jump from one stage of development to another. And there's no real right or wrong answer. It's basically how you set up your theory and how you explain how things occur. And most of what we'll be covering in this course will be stage theories. So there's three different types of development: cognitive, moral, and psychosocial, and they all run in parallel, and we'll be all covering all three of these. Are they separate stages or continuous process of development? Well, in Piaget, you have more of a stage theory where you jump from one stage to the next, sensory, motor to pre-operational, depending on your biological maturation. Erikson is a little bit less of a stage theory, although there are 8 stages of development. But Erikson is not focused more on physiological change. He's focused more on social experiences, and those social experiences may be delayed or accelerated in particular ways that makes it hard to see it as a strictly stage theory that Piaget's theory is. And then Kohlberg, once again, talks about 3 different types of morality, and they have been linked to changes in terms of biological maturation, changes of age. But it's also based on experience, and you're going to have adults that are acting at the lowest level of morality at times. So it's hard to see this as strictly a stage theory and more of a continuous evolution towards a more sophisticated adult. So prenatal development. We start with conception. We then undergo some prenatal changes. Then we end up with the competent newborn. We're defining conception as the unification of the sperm and egg to bring together genetic material from the 2 parents and to form one organism, the fertilized cell called the zygote. And so the zygote starts out from the first 10 to 14 days. After the nuclei of the egg and the sperm fuse, the cell undergoes rapid mitosis. And then eventually, during the zygotic stage, within the first 14 days, cells start to differentiate into specialized locations and structures. So you have specialized cells for different organs. And then the zygote gets implanted into the uterus, and by the 2-week mark to the 8-week mark becomes known as the embryo. So implantation into uterine wall, and now the cells become more differentiated into organs and bones. And finally, at 9 weeks, the hands and the face have developed, and the embryo becomes now known as the fetus. And the fetus connects to the mother through the placenta, which is a feeding tube, and receives all nutrients from the mother. By 4 months, you see more sophisticated fetal development. Now you can see, a head-shaped skull, right? The skull's more mature here. You see the fingers on the hands form and legs and feet. So 4 months, you see more differentiation into specialized features. And by 6 months, there is the possibility of survival outside the womb for the fetus. So the fetus may be viable by 6. Now that's the earliest phase in which the fetus is viable outside the womb, 6 months. The fetus will have to be on a respirator. The fetus will have to be, I should say the baby at that point, because outside the womb, now it's a baby. The baby is on the respirator. The baby is being fed intravenously. The baby will have to stay in the hospital for a prolonged period of time until lungs are fully developed and the other organs are matured enough where the baby can live outside of the hospital, outside of the assisted technology in the hospital. But by 6 months, there's pretty much a 50-50 chance of survival. Obviously, that's very premature, and it's still a very long fight for that child to survive, but there is the possibility of survival at 6 months with all the medical technology that has been developed over the last 20, 30 years. So while the fetus is still connected via the placenta to the mother, so before birth, the fetus is exposed to nutritious substances from the mother, but can also be exposed to dangerous substances from the mother. And those dangerous substances are known as teratogens, monster makers. These are substances such as viruses and other chemicals. These are drugs, alcohol that can damage the developing fetus, or even before the fetus, the embryo. So these are very toxic substances that the mother is sharing with her child. And the most common one being alcohol. And so a child born to a mother that consumes a moderate to a large amount of alcohol while pregnant is at risk for developing fetal alcohol syndrome. And fetal alcohol syndrome is characterized by slow physical growth, low body weight, and slow cognitive development. There may also be a flattening of the nose, the bridge of the nose on the child as a result of fetal alcohol syndrome. The child will also be prone to developing addiction to alcohol and drugs if the child is born with fetal alcohol syndrome. The child may actually enter withdrawal upon birth because the child is consuming alcohol, the mother's consuming alcohol, and therefore the child is consuming alcohol, and now the child is cut off, withdrawn suddenly. The child may actually experience withdrawal symptoms. And you see this with alcohol, but you see it more with, say, heroin, cocaine, crack, where the child is going through withdrawal. And you are setting, so the child is basically being born a drug addict. You're setting up that child for a long life of possible drug addiction, a fight against drug addiction their entire life by being born with this particular condition. And it's not, it's not like one glass of wine or one beer from the mother that's going to do this. It's a mother that drinks pretty much regularly, an alcoholic mother that's going to give birth to basically an alcoholic child. Fetal alcohol syndrome is basically an alcoholic child. And that child's at a disadvantage from the very beginning, and the child needs to be cared for and maybe withdrawn off the substance in the hospital. So it's a very serious matter. But it's not just alcohol and drugs that can cause problems. It's also viruses. So a mother that's exposed to the flu virus or other potent viruses, but most of the research centers around the flu virus, influenza virus, when she's pregnant, is more likely to give birth to a child that develops schizophrenia later in life. So they've actually found a relationship between the flu virus in mothers and the later development of schizophrenia in the child. And so there's a lot going on where, whether it's illegal drugs, legal drugs, even something as uh, pretty much benign like an Advil can cause severe damage to the child. So the mother has to be very careful of everything she puts in her body because many of these substances are poisonous and dangerous to the child, and they're known as teratogens. While the fetus is in the womb, the fetus can respond to a variety of sounds. The fetus actually comes to prefer the sound of a female voice compared to a male voice. So the fetus, once the fetus is born, the baby prefers the female voice compared to a male voice because the baby's been listening to that in the womb for the last 9 months. And fetus can respond to sounds, so they can recognize, they can adapt to sounds, they can learn to ignore things, so they actually habituate it, or they just completely ignore annoying sounds or repeated exposure. But you know that the child's responding to sounds. If the child's kicking in a particular way, the child could be agitated by a sound or happy about a sound. But the child can actually tune out certain distractions as well in the womb. And then finally, the fetal period is over. The child is born. The child wants back in. The world's a horrible place. Please put me back. Now, newborn infants actually are born with they have certain innate reflexes that enable their survival. So these are not learned at all. These are innate reflexes. The child is born with them. So it's completely nature and not influenced by nurture at all. So they have reflexes to ensure that they will be fed. So they will actually turn towards the mother and they will suck on the mother's nipple. Like, you do not need to train the infant to do this. The infant knows how to suck automatically. The infant is born knowing how to do that. The infant is born knowing to turn their head and feed. This is innate. Nothing has to be taught. So this is the rooting reflex. If you touch an infant's cheek, the infant will turn towards that side with an open mouth because that's a feeding reflex. How do I get fed? How do I survive? I have to know how to do this. The infant is born doing this. That's the rooting reflex and the sucking reflex. Obviously, if you have the rooting reflex, the infant needs to know how to suck as well to be fed. So if you put your finger in an infant's mouth, they will automatically suck on it. That enables their survival. And of course, everybody's favorite, crying. The infant knows how to cry at many times. They cry when hungry, they cry when they're in pain, they cry for a variety of reasons, and you have to figure out why they're crying. But they will cry, and that motivates the parent to act. And that enables the baby to survive. So if the baby's hungry, needs to be fed, the baby cries, the parent feeds them. The baby's in danger and needs to be protected, the baby cries, the parent protects them. That enables the baby's survival. So all three of these, rooting, sucking, and crying, are innate, inborn, and they all enable the infant's survival. Now, some other things are inborn as well. So if you show infants these two pictures, the infant prefers and looks twice as long as the image on the left. This is even after 1 hour after birth, which is amazing, compared to the image on the right. And so if you look at the image on the left, it looks like a human face. The image on the right looks like, I don't know, some spoon with holes in it. So the infant prefers things that look like a human face. I mean, that doesn't have to be learned. The infant knows what a human being looks like and prefers that. And once again, that increases the survival of the infant to know that this person is going to take care of me. This is where I want to be. Now, how much are we stable from very young, our early years in life, even going back to infancy, and how much do we change? And there's different theories. Temperament tends to be relatively stable. This is a theory by Jerome Kagan, biological theory that we'll talk about in the next module. Attachment theory, another thing we'll talk about in the next module, is also tends to be stable. So attachment theory says that the way you are at 1 year of age is the way you are, 1 year of age with your caregiver, your mother, is the way you're going to be in relationships later in your life. So if you had a very anxious relationship with your mother and you were very clingy with your mother, then you tend to be clingy in relationships later in life. If you kind of were independent of the mother early in your life at 1 year of age, then you're independent of your significant other or your relationship later in life. So we haven't changed that much. So there's many theories out there that say we don't change. I mean, Piaget's theory says we do change. Erickson's theory say we do change over time, but attachment and temperament say we're relatively stable over time. So there's a variety of different theories that have conflicting results with regard to how stable our personality is over time.